Hello and welcome back to Eagle Forum's YouTube channel. I'm Colleen Holcomb and we are here to discuss the final episode of the FX Hulu series Mrs. America. I'm joined by Cori, who is our Eagle Forum chairman, and the daughter of Phyllis Schlafly. She's here to set the record straight about the series. So let's talk about this final episode. This is the 9th episode entitled Reagan. It centers around both the Over the Rainbow banquet that Phyllis and the Stop ERA Coalition had to bury the Equal Rights Amendment after the original and true statutory deadline passed. It also shows Phyllis looking depressed as the Reagan administration approached, and I can't imagine that anything's further from the truth. Anne, can you tell us a little bit about your recollections from 1979 leading up to 1980 and the election of Ronald Reagan?
Well, of course, my mother was a delegate in favor of Ronald Reagan, and she fully supported his candidacy and rejoiced in his victory. Although, yes, it's true that my mother flirted with the idea of moving to Washington and taking a position in the Reagan administration. That flirtation, I think, lasted about 24 hours. She was not designed to work in somebody's administration. She enjoyed her liberties to speak too much, and she enjoyed her work with the grassroots too much to ever have joined an administration or tried to have some other kind of boss in her life, because that wasn't who she was. But she was very pleased that so many of her lieutenants did get jobs in the administration. People like Rosemary Thompson and Donna Hearn and Shirley Cori, all of whom she worked with closely during that time, they all got jobs in the Reagan administration. So I think the idea of her being sad and depressed at seeing somehow passed over misses the true story, where she felt very glad about planting her allies in this administration in order to influence the policy that would happen. Now, they have this idea that she wanted to be ambassador to the United Nations, and that is a complete misunderstanding. That my mother spent most of her life fighting against the UN. She thought the UN should be abolished. She thought the United States should not be a part of the UN. And I would say fully that if she were offered the ambassadorship to the UN, she would have declined it just on general, I don't like the UN principles.
Yeah, it's when I worked with Phyllis, used to always say, "Now your job is to make people think that I'm in Washington, D.C. so that I don't have to be." She was very thankful that she didn't have to be in D.C., even though she still has such a tremendous influence on what goes on there. Now, we've talked a lot throughout the series about the character Alice. Alice is a purely fictitious character who was really designed to make Phyllis look bad. And in this episode, Phyllis is racing around, as you said, trying to get an appointment in the Reagan administration, and she apparently forgot to pick you up. So you, in this episode, call Alice to pick you up.
I like the idea that I was a young girl, but I had enough moxie to figure out how to get home from school. I salute the writers for thinking so highly of me.
Yeah. That's right. Resourcefulness, that might have been the one thing that they got right. But was there any accuracy to the Alice character, or to the idea that any of Phyllis's close connections really rejected the ERA and rejected Phyllis?
No, all of that is made up, because I think it's purposeful that they want to show her in a really bad light. I mean, they show her asking around for somebody to go pick me up, and I mean, it was just kind of silly to present it that way.
There's also a character named Pamela who is seen throughout the series. It's indicated that she has at the very least, a controlling, probably an abusive husband. And at the end, she's seen as having another baby with him. And it's suggested that Phyllis is the one who told her to go back to her abusive husband. Is there any truth to that depiction?
Well, I'm sure that my mother counseled many women throughout her lives, because I know that many women went to my mother for advice, to discuss their personal problems with her. And she was my guess is she always tried to help women. Certainly, that is a lot of what I saw in her relations. But I never was aware of any character like is described on that. I think my mother tended to be very encouraging and supportive of women. She certainly encouraged and supported marriage, and loved the idea of being married, loved the idea of a family life, and but we really don't know what this husband is like. It's sort of alluded and hinted at, but it isn't fully described as to what these abuse is. And I think it's left purposely murky because I doubt any incident like that ever happened.
Well, it's definitely hard to imagine among the ERA crowd too. These are a lot of incredibly, fierce, determined, strong women. And most of their husbands, there's even an award that Eagle Forum founded named after your father, the Fred Schlafly Award, for these husbands who are tremendously supportive and love the fact that their wives are strong and involved and incredibly capable. So it just seems like a completely misplaced character.
It is. It is. And I think that the idea of making the Eagles who supported my mother out to be sad sacks or squished upon women is part of the producer's idea of it, but it does not understand how forceful and how strong and the core beliefs of these women. And I don't understand the change in the Alice character, that somehow she is doing much better because she gets an outside job where she's making 400 calls a day and being paid, as opposed to being a volunteer and making 400 calls a day for a passion, a mission that she was fully engaged on. I think if any of us have to spend hours on the phone, we would rather be making calls for a cause that we truly believe in than random sales calls are always difficult.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Now, we also see in this episode Congressman Phil Crane, who of course has passed away, and like many of the characters who are depicted badly in this series, can't defend himself, but he's shown once again as a ladies' man, not only continuing to flirt with Phyllis, but Phyllis suggests, she's asking him if there's any truth to the rumor that he and his wife were involved in a menage a trois, which is I can't even imagine Phyllis knowing that term. Is there any truth to any of
Yes, I don't know. It's certainly, Phil Crane did run for president in 1980, but my mother chose to support Ronald Reagan, and what they've manufactured there is, who knows? I mean, they're trying to make some titillating stories, I think.
Well, and it's my understanding that Phil Crane got into the race, he wanted to increase name recognition, and he wanted a conservative in the race, and that Reagan got in relatively late, and that's part of the reason he was involved. I know from several of the ladies who worked on Capitol Hill while Congressman Crane was there that he was known to be an honorable man, and that there was no truth to this depiction, but really a shame. Now, we also see some cameos from characters purporting to be Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. What did you think about that?
Well, they're purposely doing that in order to draw a connection with Donald Trump and his campaign in 2016. But here's what the story misses, is that my mother opposed Roger Stone and fought against his policies in multiple Republican national conventions, because Roger Stone and his wife Ann Stone were very much, they had an organization to put abortion rights into the language of the Republican Party. And they spent, I think there was one convention in Houston where they famously spent $10 million on their cause, which my mother opposed and ultimately won. So they sort of show her as chummy with this man that she fought for years later. So I think they missed a bit of the history there.
Right, and I think it's clear she's trying to get the Reagan administration's attention. She already had it, but what was your reaction to the depiction of the Over the Rainbow celebration? Was any of that accurate?
Well, I think they make the room look not quite full of people. My memory of it is that it was jam-packed with over 1,000 people, and it sure didn't look like 1,000 or 1,200 people in the way in the room that they showed. It looked rather modest, I thought, but there's no question that there was a bomb threat, and the room was evacuated because of the bomb threat. So there were actually two celebrations. The first celebration in '79, there was a bomb threat. We evacuated the room. They swept it. There was no bomb. And then we went back and finished the celebration. In '82, my mother had the dogs sniff out the room prior to the party. And then when the bomb threat came, she said, nope, we're not breaking up the party. I'm not falling for that trick again. And so we went on with the party despite the bomb threat, and a good time was had by all.
uh, Now, toward the end of the series, we talked about this a little bit, but Phyllis is shown as being depressed, getting a very disappointing call from Ronald Reagan, and then she just goes back to the kitchen. And again, my thoughts were Phyllis was probably thrilled to have an opportunity to be back in her kitchen, and she continued to impact policy from the comfort of her own home. And
it makes it show as though that was the end of her career, that she lost in the Reagan administration and she had no effect in the subsequent decades. But as we know, she wrote a bunch more books. She participated in a bunch more Republican conventions. She was an influencer. She established an office in Washington and had a series of executive directors run the Washington office, including you, Colleen Holcomb. She did a multitude of things in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I think they're trying to make it seem as though that was the end of her career, but it really was the beginning of her career.
It was. I remember Phyllis talking about the 1980s as being such an exciting time, and you're right. That was the time the Washington, D.C. office was founded in conjunction at the same time as the Ronald Reagan inauguration. As you mentioned, that was a big year. There was an enormous fight over the Republican Party platform in 1980, and that was a huge success for the grassroots. So I agree. The idea that was a depressing and a disappointing year for Phyllis, I think was certainly to drive a point. I'd love to just get go ahead, yeah.
Well, I thought I would make a food point. What she's shown as making at the very end of the show is baked apples. She has the baking dish there, and she's peeling the apples for the baked apples. But if anyone has ever made baked apples, you never peel the apples when you bake them. So I think they should have done their research a little better on that one.
On that point and so many more. And in addition to everything else that she does, is also a highly respected and a really remarkable chef. I'd love to just get your take on the series overall. What do you think the point was? What do you think they were trying to say? And how important do you think this series is in history?
Well, I'll quote the producer who was saying that it was her purpose to show a woman who was both exploited the patriarchy for her own gain, but then was a victim of the patriarchy. And that is their vision of Phyllis Schlafly. And of course, if my mother saw it, she would have laughed at this vision of being a victim of the patriarchy, because my mother felt this as though she had enormous success in her life, and she rejected the notion of the patriarchy as somehow opposed to women or oppressing women, and that is what she spent her life working against, was the ideology that really keeps women down, which is a pessimistic ideology that you will never win because the patriarchy is against you. That is the message of Mrs. America. And once again, it's a false message, and it's a false message to young women to think they will always lose, whether they're on the right side or the left side, they're going to lose because there's this unknown patriarchy out there that's squishing them. Well, as we know, we can be enormously successful in lives, and we can be enormously successful because we put ourselves out there, we get our voice out there, and that insertion of our voice into the marketplace can work. And my mother was living proof of the success that women can have. And I think this is a hard pill for feminists to swallow, is that she was successful.
That's right. And she didn't have to reject marriage and didn't have to reject motherhood in order to be successful. And I think that's something that really resonates with so many young women, even though they get so many conflicting messages from academia and certainly from the media, like this series.
Well, I mean, is your husband and partner in life your adversary, or is he on your side? You get the idea from this show that by the very definition of marriage, it's an adversarial relationship. And that certainly was not true in my parents' relationship. And I think for most marriages, your spouse is your best friend.
It certainly should be. That's exactly right. And certainly among the Eagles, I would recommend to any young women, either who are newly married or looking to become married, if you'd like to get around some women who have some great marriages and know how to be effective and to have a great marriage in the midst of it, get to know the Eagle Forum ladies. You can't find better role models. Well, and I would like to just ask you, what would you say to someone watching the series who's looking for an organization or a philosophy that truly supports and empowers women?
There's no question that the history of Eagle Forum has been about empowering women and providing women with the tools to become powerful. That is what we do, and I welcome young women to join us and find out what it's all about. We're at eagleforum.org, and we do provide an alternative to the popular culture narrative that the deck is stacked against you, because it isn't stacked against you. You can have enormous power and influence, and we'd like to help you at Eagle Forum.
Well, I do invite anybody watching, please connect with us. We'd love to continue this conversation. The series might be over, but we have a lot more uplifting material to share with you. So please do like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Please like us here on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'd really like to encourage you, and we welcome you. So thank you again, Anne, for being with us, and we look forward
to. My pleasure.
Thank you. We'll continue this conversation. Thank you.